Today, we are going to go over Ghost Town funnel, where your landing page and your calendar is as empty as Ghost Town. So we are going to go through some of the symptoms of Ghost Town, KPIs, guardrails, and the money maths behind it once we fix that. Now, Ghost Town in and of itself is Constraint D1 and D2 in the Constraints playbook, which you can find on my website. So what does it actually mean to be in a ghost town? Well, you're posting, you're tinkering ads, and people like your content, but your calendar is still empty. And you don't have a conversion problem yet because there's no seriously qualified leads to talk to. So that's the problem we are dealing with at the moment. And for ghost town, let's quickly define that. So you've got views, you've got likes, and maybe some clicks, but almost no qualified calls. And the revenue is flat because your top of the funnel is tiny or empty. So in this video, I'll show you two early stage constraints that causes ghost town, effectively D1 and D2, and the KPIs that matters and the tests we run to fix them, and how much money are you leaving on the table if you consistently do, as Mr. Hormozi said, the daily rule of 100. Okay, so let's get to it. Symptoms, D1 and D2. So D1 is ghost town in and of itself. That means you have no traffic. So your YouTube upload maybe 1 or 2 random posts a month, and you do outbound when you have time, and your ad spend is often on and off with no or very little daily budget. And your whole sales pipeline in and of itself is almost non-existent, maybe 0 to 1 serious calls a week. And D2, which is the one below ghost town, so you've got some activities and very little audience. You do post on YouTube, LinkedIn, and email somewhat consistently, but still with a very few amount of clients that's coming in. And the problem is that it's the same 300 to 1,000 people that's seeing everything. Basically, nothing gets repurposed, and you're always making new content instead of milking or reusing old winners. So these two things are the bane of every business. If you don't have any outputs, then where are the inputs? Now let's go to KPI for this line. So there are two types of KPI, the output in and of itself, as well as the input. Now the output of this KPI is obviously the amount of qualified leads you talk to on a weekly basis from the content and the ads you're doing. However, the input KPIs, which are the actions you take on a daily basis, for D1, it's uploads per week. It's either YouTube blogs, shorts, or LinkedIn posts. And as Mr. Hormozi said, the rule of 100, where you do 100 outbound touches or 100 minutes a day of content plus ad work. And for D2, which is very little volume and tiny audience, it's the number of pieces of content each week that using proven hooks, which have been engaged by your previous audience. And the amount of calls coming from these content and the amount of content source ads. So basically for constraint D1 is that do we have enough shots on the go? And for D2, which is a little bit better, are we showing enough shots to more than 300 people of the same group? Okay, so we are going to do a constraint walkthrough to diagnose whether you're D1 or D2. So the steps to check whether traffic is your main constraints are: check the last 30 to 60 days, the amount of total minutes of content and ads that you've created or distributed, and the total amount of qualified calls from these content and ads. And if these content minutes are basically 0 and calls are basically 0, then you've got D1 constraint, which is ghost town, nothing at all. But if you're posting and emailing and running some sort of ads, but with tiny reach and winners aren't reused, then we call that D2, which is tiny volume and very little audience. So basically the constraint D1 is no volume at all. Constraint D2 is no amplification. Now, once we understand these symptoms, we can finally put the KPIs on it so we can solve these problems. Okay, so if we're running a 12-week sprint on D1 and D2, what KPI will we use? That's the question. And now, obviously, the primary KPI for both of them are very similar. It's the amount of qualified sales calls a week from your chosen channels. And for each subtype, for example, D1 and D2, we'll go through their respective guardrails so we don't win on the qualified calls but lose somewhere else downstream. So the guardrail for D1, it's the amount of lead fit. So the majority of calls are qualified, meaning that they are your ICP and qualify for ban. BANT. Basically, it means budget, authority, need, and timing. Okay, and the reasonable amount of time or ad costs per call. So your CAC. For example, you're spending less than 2 hours of sales or creator time and your cost of acquisition is reasonable enough for the amount of qualified calls you got. And the third guardrail for D1 is channel focus. So basically what we do is one primary organic channel, which might be YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook, plus one paid channel, which might be Meta or Google. And no new platforms mid-sprint because focused is much better than spray and pray. Now let's go to D2 guardrail. The first one is the percentage of calls that are truly your ICP, meaning that whether they are qualified or not. It's similar to D1, so you don't get random tourists that's coming in. The second one is narrative coherence. So one hero narrative per 4-week chunk. And you don't change the narrative mid-sprint because you want to be consistent with your messaging and with your outputs. And the third one, obviously, it's CAC versus LTGP. And everything and your unit economics still works when you turn content winners into ads. So once we have these two KPIs and their respective guardrails, what do we do with them? Well, obviously, we put them into tests. And the tests are what we actually do on a weekly basis so we can implement them. Okay? So the question comes back down to how do I fix this constraint in practice? Now let's do 5 test examples, okay? Now test number 1, the rule of 100, famously coined by Mr. Hormozi himself. So for 90 days, 100 outbound touches or 100 minutes of scripting, shooting, editing, posting, or ad creation on your 2 primary channels, which is the one organic and the other one is paid, okay? So no 0 days, no consistent-ish. You do that for every single day of the week for 90 days. And the second one, which we've said already, is that you choose 1 primary organic channels and 1 paid channel. So you pick 1 organic, YouTube blondes, and cut them into shorts, and 1 paid, which you can be Meta or Google, into cold audiences or retargeting warm audiences. And with that said, for this test, you turn off everything else. So no random LinkedIn sprints, no LinkedIn posts, no TikTok experiments, just 2 channels because focus beats spray and pray. Test number 3, build a hook bank. So what is a hook bank? A hook bank is a set or a swipe file of all the winning hooks which you have gotten for the past 60 to 90 days. So what you do is you dig through the last 60 to 90 days of posts on emails, YouTube titles, sales call notes, and you click these lines that actually led to DMs, led to book calls, or even sales. So that is your idea bank, which you can reuse and repurpose, and it's very important. It will save you a lot of time, so you don't need to spin up new ideas every now and then. And test number 4, once we have that hook bank, right, we have this set of ideas and a set of hooks that actually led to sales, calls, or even DMs, then we double the output of content using these hooks. So around 70 to 80% of your new content should be reskins of these proven hooks. For example, new angles, new thumbnails, but the core promise remains the same. So it could be reducing your client's lead nurture SLA time or 3 automations or roadmap, etc. Because you know these hooks work, so the content gets watched, the ads gets watched, which is obviously very important because once they know what you're offering, then they can click on your landing page, they can book sales calls. If you don't have any traffic, no landing page, no sales calls, empty funnel. And test number 5, turn best pieces into ads, which is pretty logical, right? First, you concentrate the amount of output you do every day. Second, you choose 2 primary channels on these outputs. And third, you build a hook bank so you know what works previously. Fourth, reuse them again on most of your content. And fifth one, once you really hit winners with these contents, then you turn these into ads. So take your best 3 to 5 organic winners and cut them into 15 to 60-minute versions of ads. And you convert them into posts, or you can convert into text and make them static images for ads as well, which is pretty good these days. So it's the same hooks, same stories, same CTA. So you run code on Meta to strangers. Now, obviously, once we have the tests, we come to the next step. Now we go to the money math and the lane uplift. So let's go through a few examples of how we do money math for D1 and D2 being the primary constraint. So obviously in any money math we do in constraint sprint, we are looking for the delta, the difference between the baseline to the targeted KPI. And that's the money which we make. So for constraint D1, D2, it's obviously the amount of qualified calls you have every week. For example, right now you have only 1 qualified calls a week from the content and ads you already have. And after the 5 tests, let's say you have 5 calls. And what's the delta? 4. So let's assume your close rate on qualified calls is about 30%, which is pretty normal, 1 in 3 buys. So let's say that you have 4 extra calls a week and times by 0.3, that's 1.2 new clients every week, which is around 5 clients every month. And if each client is worth about $3,000 top line with 50% gross margin, that's 5 times 1.5 equal to 7.5 extra gross profit a month. And how much is that in a year's time? Times by 12, that's around $90,000 a year. $90,000 extra gross profit. 90. That's quite a lot for a business if they're just starting out. And this is how we turn ghost town into a small city, and that's how much is worth fixing this ghost town constraint. And that is why businesses should be obsessed about D1 and D2 constraints before anything else. Because if there is no traffic coming in, there will not be lead nurture, there will not be sales structure or scripting, and there will not be retention and LTV, which we will talk about in the coming videos. Now, on a side note, often I see a lot of bloat and chaos and waste of value due to lack of focus, especially on D1 and D2 constraints. For example, you have 5 or 6 half-dead channels. So new channels, new lead magnets, new brand angles every month, and random ad tests with like $5 budget a day on 4 different platforms. So the outcome is that you have no clean data, you have no volume, and you have no pipeline. So when D1 and D2 are actually done right, it's actually pretty boring because it's just 1 organic, 1 paid, and 1 flagship front-end offer, and a set of proven hooks that your previous audiences have engaged with. And then it just rinse and repeat until you have enough calls coming in on a weekly basis. Okay, now let's set a few points of expectations so we don't actually delude ourselves. Okay, so for D1 example, it might be a B2B AI agency posting 1 YouTube blog a month with random LinkedIn post and a $10 budget on Meta. But after the 90-day sprint and the rule of 100 plus 1 organic and 1 paid, you will probably have 3 to 5 pieces of short and longs on YouTube a week and 4 to 8 qualified calls a week from both the content as well as the ads. Okay, now for D2, an agency with 20 old posts that produces 90% of calls historically, but never gets repurposed or reused. Now after D2 test, those 20 posts get recycled as new posts, new emails, new shorts, and 3 to 5 ad creatives, which can potentially, I'm saying potentially 3 to 5 extra pipeline. That's something. If your B2B automation or agentic agency is stuck between $40,000 to $80,000 a month, posting and doing ads, but your calendar is still ghost town, you're almost likely D1 or D2. Now here's what to do next. Take the 5-minute constraint finder and see if it tags you as D. And if it does, you can book a free 45-minute deep dive so you can pull out the last 4 to 12 weeks of your numbers and do the money math of fixing ghost town. Because ghost town funnels don't fix themselves. You need to focus on 1 lane, 1 KPI, and a disciplined 90 days of output. Because if you don't, there's no traffic and there's no leads coming, meaning no pipeline and no sales. Now, if you liked and enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please subscribe because I post on a weekly basis for different constraints that B2B AI agencies face so they can fix their bottlenecks from the leads and the clients that they already have. Over and out.